deep breath.
Go.
Good. Okay. Well, hi everybody. Welcome to another sensiLab forum. We're very lucky to have Astrid Scott from the ABC R&D department here. So Astrid's visited sensiLab before with her colleagues just after we opened, and we thought it'd be a really great opportunity for her to come back and tell us a little bit more about what she does and what her group does in terms of research at the ABC. So I won't take up any more time, but just to say thank you so much for coming out and doing this, and we're really looking forward to what you've got to say. Thank you, Astrid.
Okay, you're welcome. So hi everybody. So yeah, as John said, I work in R&D at the ABC, which is based out of Sydney and Melbourne. We're a very small unit, and I'm an experienced strategist for them. What we're charged with doing on behalf of the ABC is thinking about future media experiences for the ABC in 2020 and beyond. So we're deliberately pitching ourselves at 5 years ahead and further than that in terms of the kind of work that we do and the types of things that we think about. So, click it right. Why do we need to actually have a unit devoted to doing that at the ABC? And I think it's pretty clear to all of us, and especially anyone that's been involved with media or journalism in the last few years, that mobile technology and digital distribution has really disrupted the industry. It's just disrupted publishing across the board. Broadcasters, newspapers, even single site, publishers like a big media organisation or a big news organisation like us. We've really had to recalibrate fast. We're struggling to keep up. We're struggling to kind of meet our audience where they are, and we're sort of looking at it. This is the last 5 years. This kind of stuff obviously is emerging technology. None of it's mainstream yet. None of it's kind of some of it's a long way off. For instance, the driverless car over there. But it's still likely to have an impact on the kind of work that we do and the kind of services that we start providing. And if, we hope that we've learned from that experience of encountering mobile and the fast development of digital technology, and we're trying to basically position ourselves by planning for these experiences. So we look at sort of major technology trends and perhaps audience behaviours around those trends, and we try and identify where we as a media organisation and a public media organisation might be best positioned to provide content. So, there's been a lot going on. So the way that we sort of do that is that we try, and obviously a lot of you will be very familiar with the technology space, and I'm sorry if it's explaining the obvious, but we try and look at kind of sort of big movements or big shifts that we can see the emerging, the emergence of in technology, and also in the way that people react to technology and the way that they take up things like that. And we try and identify big groups. So this screen here sort of shows the way that we're thinking about technology shifts at the moment, the way that we're thinking about behavioural shift at the moment, where we're grouping it into these big interconnected sort of themes that we try and identify what some of the outcomes of those themes actually are. So we've got, or Mike, I'll get you to click through exponential technology, and everyone was probably familiar with this diagram from a few years ago, but when you think about what Bill's got up to here in 2008, I mean, it's just got even more extreme since then. The processing power that's available now, the kinds of sensory environments that can be created now, the kind of hardware that can be made sort of cheaply and shipped cheaply. It's kind of out of control, the exponential growth of stuff, and that's something that we track as a provider of content, because we're constantly having to think about it. We're already troubled by the development of so many different screens and so many different ways of distributing content that we, when we start thinking about what's down the corner, we need to, we really need to plan ahead. This is, screen is where we're thinking about the kind of context for consuming content from like news or entertainment. We're thinking about ubiquitous intelligent computing. So we're thinking about environments where the device on your person might speak to a device that's embedded in your home environment or your car, or how you're going to think about getting a daily news service, for instance, in an environment where perhaps, you know, items or objects in your home might be the provisioning tool for that. The next one. Artificial intelligence is obviously a big one, and, you know, it might not seem like an obvious move from, you know, sort of, you know, the big tech company agenda of creating artificially intelligent, you know, search engines and artificially intelligent tools such as, you know, personal virtual assistants or Siris or Cortanas or whatever. But, you know, they're using content. They need to collect the items that they service, and we're the provisioner of those items. So we have to sort of monitor this and track this in order to understand, you know, how best to get our content into the mix so that we stand out and that we're giving, you know, the Australian people, I suppose, given that you're our employers, the Australian people the right kind of content. Big data and the quantified self, obviously big data up until about sort of a couple of years ago was a lot more about marketing and trying to scrape sentiment off Facebook posts and that sort of thing. Now it's moving into biofeedback, you know, and the amount of data that, you know, is going to be available to, you know, companies that are providing media services is going to be huge. And then how do we use that? Obviously people are looking at, you know, mood-related tools at the moment. I just read something the other day about, you know, a tool that can analyse your, basically you put in a name of the person, it goes out, finds all the data that it can about them, and then creates a personalised profile to help you email them more effectively. So that kind of stuff is definitely in development. We see it with the Fitbits and the wearables and, you know, the brain kind of like brainwave tracking devices that enable us to you know, get more information than we've ever had before. And then that in turn leads us to, you know, putting that information back into a context. So we're thinking now about not just screens, we're not just designing for mobile phones anymore, or we're not going to just be designing for, you know, desktops. We're designing for eye tracking, or we're designing for gesture, or we're designing for brainwaves. Ultimately, you know, we have to start thinking about this because this is the context that's emerging now, and will be relevant to people, if not in 5 years, maybe in 7 years or 10 years. You know, the point is that we have to track it, plan for it, and, you know, in the case of a public service organisation, ask for budget related to that. So that's the kind of environment, and I'll get you to click through, but I suppose the thing that that we spend a lot of our time doing, and just in addition to, you know, reading every sort of email that comes through our feed, is we start thinking about the opportunities that that media companies might have in this space. Where do we position ourselves? What's the most likely thing that journalists, TV producers, digital content producers, radio producers are going to have to think about? So I pulled together a few examples just to touch on what we are doing at the moment. The first one is virtual reality. As you can see, VR is not 5 years down the track, it's literally here, and it has a huge number of applications for people who've been traditional broadcasters or digital media companies, because it is reaching out into all these different areas. Obviously, you know, we're seeing the rise in the technology, so with the Oculus and all the different headsets like the Samsung Vive and the Vives and the Google Cardboards, but we're also seeing a dramatic increase in the amount of content that's being produced, and it's content that's not just restricted to the traditional kind of gaming realm, that it's content that moves into our area. So we're looking at, you know, Clouds Over Sidra at the top there, which is journalism, you know, or short form documentary. This is, I don't know if anyone's seen this piece of VR content, but it was a documentary made with the RSC, which is Chris Mills' production company, and the UN, and it basically tracks a day in the life of a Syrian refugee in Jordan, Sidra, she's up the top there, and you basically go with her into various parts of the camp. The impact of that is really difficult to describe if you haven't actually experienced it. It's been talked about as a tool for empathy. It's going to change the face of journalism, because people will basically feel what it's like to be really there in the space, experiencing what someone else might experience. And there's other examples. The most recent UN film, and that producing a few, is about what it's like to live with Ebola. So things that you would never get to ordinarily experience, you can experience, and it's not the same as watching traditional current affairs coverage. So that's a big opportunity for journalists. People talk about it as immersive journalism. We imagine the ABC in 5 years is producing this kind of thing, and we're already dipping our toe in the water with experiments now. So, you know, imagine if as the technology develops and you get more into you know, sort of the NUI interfaces, so the natural user interfaces, that you're in a virtual reality environment and you can interact with different, you know, objects in your environment. You can control your experience to that degree, and you can really, one day further down the track, when haptic feedback perhaps becomes, you know, a more credible or a more obvious mainstream kind of experience, people can literally touch their virtual environments. So yeah, we're definitely very interested in how this is going to influence us in not only the news space, but also clicking through into the education space. Obviously, ABC's provider of education services. They've shipped, I think, 1 million cardboards already, you know, and they've shipped them to schools all throughout the US. People are already taking virtual reality school excursions. I talked to a company who are based out of Perth actually, but they're an international company, and they're already providing school excursions to places around the world, shot in 360, that they can experience using their cardboard headset. So this is, you know, it's a huge opportunity for an education provider, and as the ABC we have to really think about, well, how might we design unique Australian experiences that are educational, of interest around the world and to Australian people. So yeah, these kind of, you know, you imagine if you're going back in time on a school field trip, you know, you could go back and using a Unity environment like the Angkor, for instance, and be in the simulation, understand what it's like to actually be there, because, you know, you're fully immersed in a 360. But I guess one of the criticisms for that is that it's a solo experience at the moment, and although Facebook are talking a lot about how they might, you know, be using VR for social, and I know there's a lot of potential application for VR commerce and that kind of thing. At the moment, as broadcasters, we also think ahead to, you know, when you've moved beyond that kind of solo immersive experience, how do you use the technology that's emerging now, like HoloLens? So this is obviously the Minecraft HoloLens demo, and how do you use this kind of like environmental sort of display, or being, you know, the full immersion that might happen in your living room to create experiences as a broadcaster? So we've got, you know, a lot of television properties. We're very interested in, you know, what's the future of a television experience, because so much of what TV is a shared experience. It's about the family sitting down together, trying to do things together, or trying to watch together. With something like this, you could imagine, I don't know, Play School's coming up for its 50th anniversary. Play School's been around for 50 years. What if in 5 years' time we're talking about Play School being a living room experience? I mean, we're not, we're imagining, but, you know, what if, you know, or Giggle and Hoot, for instance, what if you could sit in the treehouse and giggle and hoot and interact with all the, you know, objects in the treehouse, interact with the characters and feel the, you know, the full experience around you. So these sort of applications go beyond living room spaces. They go into school classrooms, they go into the commuting experience once you get past, you know, if you get not even driverless cars, but you get to a connected car environment, the back seat could be just so much less challenging for parents driving somewhere if the kid was fully immersed in their own sort of play space. We also think about things like, I guess, our science and health content. We have a lot of very, very highly regarded science and health content on the ABC, and, you know, what if Catalyst allowed you to look at Parkinson's disease at a cellular level, and you could pull it apart, you could control you know, I guess, control the information so that you could understand it at your own space, that we weren't just, you know, broadcasting you a science program, we were giving you the tools in which you could really understand. And you could potentially work with a journalist to understand it as well, like the idea that that there's the opportunity for live science journalism is not really explored that much, but it could be really fantastic. And there are a lot of parallels in the science world at the moment and the tech world that you could see that kind of thing becoming possible as the technology advances. And you know, you sort of click through to the next slide. I think I've got, you know, got SpaceX here, but you know, I mean, it's just leap motion. It's not, you know, super advanced technology or anything. It's possible to do these things now. Imagine what we'll be able to do. And I know that, I think it was you that's doing very similar kind of projects here in the sensiLab, that it's easy to imagine that given the planning and time and the right kind of content, you could create really exciting content experiences for people that they would actually use because it's valuable for them. So, just clicking through to the next slide, it's probably to take a different angle, getting away from the immersion and the in-depth storytelling or in-depth information, thinking more about that thing I mentioned before about the personalised, contextualised experience. And this probably relates a lot more to our role as a news and information provider. Obviously, ABC News is a big part of what we do, and we are very interested in how to give people the best, you know, information from all our wealth of different services. And we've got so many different news services throughout radio, throughout news, throughout our international properties. So how do we get you in the environment that you're in, the news that's most relevant for you? And that's something that all news organisations are struggling with and dealing with at the moment. And Google's already dipped its toe, you know, it's getting in there with Google Now and trying to provide this, you know, this contextualised experience that means that you get the news that you want when you want it. We've done a couple of live trials, prototype trials with very personalised news, where we've given people a number of options to experiment with their settings, their news settings, so they could, rather than our traditional editorial, you know, this is the news the ABC thinks is important, this is the most recent news, and this is the news that, you know, is personalised by your location or the kinds of things that you're interested in, say sports or arts. We did a trial which was a regional trial in Canberra and also in Albury-Wodonga, where we basically allow people to personalise by their topic interests, and we tried to take that down to a really almost the next level down from news, sports, arts, world, that kind of thing. And we gave people, they could only have crime news, for instance, if they wanted to do that. And then that preferencing algorithm then competed with where they were, you know, the most recent kind of news coming in, and also, you know, the I guess the editorial way that we would give a story, because we think that's a really must-need-to-know story. And the results are quite interesting. How people experience news can be quite different in different times of the day. So, you know, we had news, you know, people saying, well, I don't want the same news in the afternoon as I want in the morning. I want to be able to flip between two profiles. I want my morning hardcore news service, and then in the afternoon I'm tired and I don't feel like that anymore, and I want something, you know, I want some more kind of human interest or animal attacks or something like that. That's going to be what if we take that sort of scenario I described before, where we're relying on biofeedback and the kinds of information that our bodies are giving us, and also the sensors in our environment. Say, you know, our house is fully filled up with beacons and can, you know, determine where we are and what time of the day it is and what our previous patterns of behaviour are. You know, maybe we're looking at an environment where it goes, well, it's, he knows, 6 o'clock in the afternoon, he's pretty grumpy, he's got an elevated heart rate. I think we'll give him some, you know, something nice from Radio National just to chill him down a little bit, you know. So that kind of service is definitely a reality. How far we want to step into that as the ABC is still open for debate. Like, all these things are currently being questioned and interrogated. What we do as an R&D unit is we think about what some scenarios are. We create these kind of scenarios, we send them back to the organisation. We'll say, these are things for you to think about. Also, if you want to start planning for this, well, you're going to have to start looking at, you know, services. You're going to improve our metadata, for instance, so that we can, you know, we can have that level of information about the kind of content that we have, that means that we can target it exactly to the person using this, unique service which is created for them. So, that challenge is one that a lot of the tech companies are taking on themselves, but they're not the content providers. We're the content providers. So, in a way, I mean, obviously we've got scenarios like Google are trying to become a content provider. They've created Google News, where they give tools to independent journalists and say go out there and create your own news stories and submit them to us, and we will put them, we're going to preference them because we're Google and we want you to do, we want you to do our work. But there's also an aspect of deciding where we sit as the ABC. We're a trusted brand. People come to the ABC because they know that we represent, integrity and objectivity. We try very hard to do that as part of our charter. So, for a lot of people, they don't want to be thinking, well, I just don't want what Google's giving me. I don't just want the news that's being served to me by my provider. I want to make my own assessment, and having trusted kind of, news brands within that environment is a really important, a really important part of the picture, and something that we should all be discussing as we move forward as an organisation. So, we did a recent project around the future of commuting in the Australian context, and what happens when we get to a situation where we've got fully connected cars, and also beyond that, driverless cars, what kind of experience. But also this example here, which is, a contextual urban environment. What are we looking at if we're part of the kind of, landscape, the literal landscape, when we've got connected landscapes, which is something that's obviously, you already see that with interactive billboards and interactive kind of bus stops. But if these become truly personalised experiences, or they have the opportunity to become truly personalised experiences, and you're pulling in that physical self aspect of the information, then what kind of planning do we need to undertake in order to think about the ecosystem of content that we create in that environment? We're not thinking about it as, okay, well, we've got program A and program B and we're just going to keep producing these. We have to think about, well, this person might take a fully lateral path through all those content streams. They might never follow a program, and that's already happening to a large degree. People are making choices not based on, well, I always watch this, or I always listen to this, or I always follow these people. They're just getting it in a kind of almost waterfall effect, and trying to find their way through it. Try and navigate their way through it as consumers as best they can. So how do we make sure that we're part of this picture in a really useful way? Because our job's to be useful to the Australian public. It's, there's no other motivation. We're not actually profit-making enterprise. What we do is we try and demonstrate value by providing services where people are. So it's an interesting question, and it's one that we have to talk about a lot. And I think this is true of all big media organisations around the world, like the BBC and sort of New York Times, Al Jazeera, all grappling with these issues and trialling different things. The BBC has just started a trial in the UK about basically supporting local news providers that are not the BBC as part of their and that was part of the prototype that we also ran last year. In the personalisation prototype, we allowed people to feed in also content from their local environment to try and almost create these mini ecosystems of content that people could, get into. So, I think I'm probably getting close to overtime, but just the next one, Mike. So I guess the major challenges that we face in order to try and, sort of create this future or plan for this future is first of all, determining relevance to the audience. So how do you establish which of these things are going to be just flash in the pan trends, and which of them are actually going to be real currents of change that affect consumers across lots of different levels, because change is obviously really incremental. It happens differently across different social sectors, according to money, according to age, according to, you know, cultural background. And so how do you plan for an audience that doesn't necessarily exist yet? So we spent a lot of time basically looking at people now and looking at their core motivations and trying to decide which of these motivations could, you know, be, I guess, spun off into this direction, and how might that look in 5 years' time. Designing a holistic experience, and I suppose that's talking about that ecosystem thing I was mentioning before, where you kind of go, well, how do I design for the bus stop and the car and the house and my, you know, personal device? You know, how do I pull all of that into a single coherent experience that means that, you know, people understand that, oh yeah, this is ABC, this is, you know, I want this. Planning content ecosystems involves planning the data and how the data works, and we're doing a bit of work around it at the moment, looking at things like natural language processing to try and determine, you know, like, we'll try and work out how we're going to meet that challenge of, you know, having each atom in the universe ready to be distributed in the appropriate fashion. And then, yeah, trust. So working out what it is that we can offer to Australians that is valuable to them, and why they should trust us to do that. Like, why should they care? That's a really important thing. And I guess one thing that we do have is that people do trust us. They know that we're not actually going to use their data for anything nefarious. We're not going to sell it to advertisers, and we're not going to snoop on them. So perhaps that's a real advantage as a public broadcaster, to be able to, you know, say, well, you can trust us to take that information about you and not use it in a negative way. So yeah, I think that's sort of my 20 minutes. That was 20 minutes, right?
Oh,
yeah.
That's the timing.
Yeah. I think so. So yeah, I guess it's does anyone have any questions about what it is? Yes.
ABC is a national organisation.
Yes.
And a lot of the systems and experiences you're designing seem to be very metropolitan oriented. So what about rural communities and the inclusion of diverse cultures?
It's a really good question, and it's not necessarily metropolitan. I think I may have used metropolitan examples. So we actually do, yeah, we have a new regional division, and we are working with them to try and work out, I guess, you know, perhaps the best areas that they might focus their roadmap, so that we can, you know, so we try and move ahead 5 years so that they can come up to meet us with their roadmap. But the trial I told you about before, that was actually specifically focused on regional communities, and some of them were larger regional centres, so we're not talking about remote necessarily, although people did use that trial in the remoter parts of the state. But we ran that trial across 5 different locations in Australia, and the idea was to try and assess the, I guess, possibility that the ABC could potentially fill gaps in local news service provision in rural areas and regional areas, because obviously that's, you know, there's a contraction in the regional media. You're seeing a lot of, I guess, local mastheads and smaller papers sort of go under because the single publishing model's not working anymore, and people are really feeling, we did a lot of research to support that trial, and people are really feeling that gap, that feeling that stuff is missing, and it's very hard for them to get, in particular, all their news needs in one place. So like their local, hyperlocal, local, national, international news, there's no one thing that they can do to get that. They need to basically, they need to get it all at the same time. Instead, they're going to sort of 5, 6, 7 different kind of services to try and build a picture of what's going on. And Facebook's definitely filling a gap in those regional areas as well. People are using Facebook almost as their local news feed by pulling in all the kind of announcements from local community groups and things like that. But the sense in those areas is, oh sorry, yeah, were you gonna?
No, it's
yeah.
okay. No, it's fine.
But the other thing, yeah, we're really interested in doing a VR trial with our regional division at the moment. We've been talking to them about potentially doing something that, you know, Australia has got this incredible sort of, I guess, you know, people are very interested in what happens in regional areas in Australia. Landline's actually more popular in urban environments in some ways than it is in regional Australia, because people are really fascinated by, you know, the lives that people live. So yeah, we're thinking an immersive experience in a regional kind of environment might be something that's really powerful and interesting. So we do like to try and consider, our director Angela is very interested in local media and in particular regional services. So yeah, we definitely do not centralise around urban experiences, because it's part of the whole challenge, and distributed as well. The ABC is distributed across 50 offices, so we've got 49 now, I think, since the restructure. So yeah, yep.
How do you convince the people you need to convince in order to get the money to trial these things? Like,
yeah, good question.
What are some of the really compelling things that you're finding now, like to sell these ideas to?
I think the thing is, and bear in mind that R&D as we are now is quite new, so we've only been around since the start of the year pretty much, but it is a little bit about that scenario. So it's about people seeing the bus stops on their way to, you know, 5 years' time. So it's about understanding what it is they do now and the key components of what it is that they do now, and how that might be transported into a future environment that's possibly alien in terms of format, but the key components would translate. So for instance, if we're talking about compelling storytelling in a current affairs context, that they can see the steps to going towards an immersive experience and understand why that might be valuable or useful. Demos where possible, but it's not always possible. So smoke and mirror demos, where you kind of try and mock up what an experience might be like in a way that feels compelling, but doesn't necessarily, you're like, we can't do that yet, but this is what it might be like. So it's sort of, yeah, those kind of hypothetical kind of scenarios where you draw it, or ideally produce a film or short video of what it might be like to use this. You the punter, come in. That's a big part of what we do. I think we always have to demonstrate strategic value, so we always have to demonstrate where the audience is now, where the audience might be then, you know, looking at you know, who exactly might be targeted by a particular experience. And then, yeah, we're not in the business of making most of these things. Sometimes we'll prototype, but generally our role is to demonstrate value, prototype it, stay across developments, and then basically assist people to get into production themselves so that they can. So for the VR example, we help people get their head around VR, we help people sort of like do demos, we get people into, you know, sort of production training, and then they're on their own when it actually comes to making content, and hopefully, you know, by that point they're prepared, so that it might not be best value for the ABC at the moment to be producing that, but it might be in 2 years' time that they already know how to do it, you know. So we're ready, we're sort of like prepping ourselves to be ready. Yeah, it doesn't always work.
So you said you've only been around since the start of the year.
Yeah.
Is that been a bit of an internal restructure in the ABC and putting emphasis on that, or has it been the government helping to lead that direction, or is it?
That's been an internal restructure within the ABC. So we used to be part of the innovation division, and there was a bigger team called strategic development that was focused more on producing digital products. So things like iView, the apps, you know, sort of doing different types of, I guess, content.
I mean, iView is something that you've gained a lot of trust and
So iView came out of the innovation division originally, and then of course it's a core part of television's portfolio, ABC TV's portfolio. So Yeah, so R&D as itself, I think, is a decision by the organisation to make a real commitment to that forward planning that's necessary in order to sort of thrive in a very rapidly changing environment. So that's, yeah, hence the creation.
Just on some of the scenarios you were talking about, it seems to me that these days there's just so much media out there, and there's a lot of companies that are now starting to realise that the curation of that media at a global level and that level of personalisation is a valid market. So it's sort of like, you know, Uber for media in a way. So how does that fit in with that strategy if you're kind of going to be at the mercy of whoever becomes the Uber of media for personalisation if that happens?
Yeah.
How's that going to affect what you do?
Do you mean that like in terms of which content we decide to produce? Like,
so at the moment there, I mean, you can. This has been around since
Yeah.
the internet began, but there are scrapers that just scrape content and personalise it towards you because you're based on things like recommender systems that you're interested in. So you can. I mean, I'm just even basic applications like Flipboard, for example, just kind of. Flipboard doesn't make its own content; it just pulls the content from different sources and it personalises it towards you. And that seems to me like some of the scenarios that you were talking about there, that was just a richer form of that. So it was based on more context and awareness of your environment, your mood, things like that, rather than just. But ultimately, is it going to be the ABC that's doing all that, or is it going to be somebody else? And the ABC is just going to be one of many content providers that different people might personalise to getting more from the ABC and less from News Limited, for example. Or do you want to actually kind of control that whole ecosystem? I don't mean you personally.
No. Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, it's a really interesting question, that one. It's quite complex too, because, I mean, in the short term, there are going to be people that want the discrete environment. They want to be immersed fully in whatever it is that the ABC produces. That's all they want. They only have the ABC, and that's about their kind of almost their identity, you know. And we particularly find that perhaps with like older market is that I'm an ABC listener or I'm an ABC watcher and I use the app, and that's what I like, you know. And I don't think that's going to go away with that particular kind of group of people necessarily. So we probably do have to create products that cater for that.
Yeah.
But more and more, it's exactly what you say, where the ABC will simply be, I guess, where our content will be part of a suite of options that people can either sort of, you know, like cherry pick from or choose over another, or, you know, add to their mix a little bit like Flipboard. And the only way really to kind of compete in that is to leverage that trusted brand thing. So like you leverage the fact that we are who we are, to be very, very good at describing our content in a way that machines can understand, which we are not currently. You know, no media company in the world is that good at the moment. That started out as a traditional broadcaster on print property, and that we, I guess that we think about. I mean, it comes back to humans in the end, that we think about the audience and what kind of content that we're producing. So we think about, okay, well, our service is to Australian people. They're going to want, you know, particular types of Australian content. So we, even down to that very regional level, that we're going, well, in our regional offices, we are producing the stuff that people in this area, and, you know, also beyond, obviously, you don't only want stuff from the place that you live, but, you know, that we produce the kind of content that they're going to want, you know, and that we're covering the things that we want. And we're doing a lot of research around, you know, the kind of news that we get now. Is it the kind of news that people actually do want? Are we meeting those needs? Are we kind of, are we covering everything? So the news division's constantly looking at that and making sure that, or I guess checking against their kind of audience to try and establish, is it a match? You know, so it's about that kind of perfect match sort of moment, I guess. Does that really answer your question, or are you sort of asking, are we going to change fundamentally because we're at the mercy of these content?
No, it answers the question very well. It was just more when you were talking about the scenarios. I mean, I think they're very plausible scenarios, but I'm just wondering how much control you actually have over them as an organisation, and whether that's the area that you want to be. Is that an area that you really can have a lot of control over?
Ultimately, one would think maybe not, but it's sort of in the short term, it's almost like you have to straddle two kind of.
I mean, it's all very speculative at the moment.
That's right.
There's nothing that satisfies that scenario perfectly at the moment, or even comes near to it. But you can certainly imagine that is what's going to happen. So it's a question of, well, as an organisation that's very trusted and very well known as a content provider, how do you just keep being a quality content provider and hope that something else is going to come and help you reach the audience that you're currently reaching, or a bigger audience?
Yeah, or do you partner up with?
Or do you partner up with the big
BBC's or whatever,
trusted brands as well, like internationally? I actually don't know how to answer that one, but it's an interesting scenario. I mean, I think in terms of partnering at a local level, that's something that we've done quietly in some trials with Fairfax Media and that sort of thing, which they're not, it certainly hasn't been a public product or anything like that. We've just been trialing small experiments, but where, you try and that was actually back to that regional example rather than a global example that you're giving, like the BBC. Like, we already do pull in content from the BBC, as you know, but that you support a healthy local media ecosystem as opposed to trying to dominate it with your brand almost, as a public broadcaster. But in terms of the commercial type partnerships, it becomes a little tricky because you still have to maintain that independence and that kind of integrity as a public media organisation, which is fundamentally different to any other kind of news provider. So the product kind of like changing the content to suit the product is also a scenario that theoretically could emerge. You might have to design your content in such a way that Google will accept it. Say it got to that. I mean, that's obviously already the case, but let's say a more extreme example of that. We only accept things that contain these elements, otherwise we're not going to push it anywhere, and that would be a real challenge for a public broadcaster because we can't be driven by commercial ventures or commercial interests at all. So we struggle with, like, this is the new world that we live in.
Yeah, I have a question regarding the compassionate journalism you were talking about.
Oh yeah.
This is a new one for me. I have not seen this before. It's very interesting. Could you elaborate on that a little bit more? I'd be interested to see, how does the production work? Like, do you have an industrial partner you collaborate with, or it's obviously not the same scenario as a journalist traveling to, say, a refugee camp and then interviewing individuals there. So there's a lot bigger production involved, I would imagine. Can you describe how you go about it?
Well, I can very easily because we haven't done it yet. So, but we are looking at it right now, and for us, because the broadcaster or the big media organisations that have done it, the New York Times have done it, and they did one with the same production company that made the Clouds Over Sidra, which is the refugee camp documentary. It's called VRSC. They're based out of the US. There's a music video producer called Chris Milk, he's one of the directors of that. So they did one where they did Walking Over New York, and they did a lot of aerial 360 over New York. Vice magazine did one. They've done a couple actually. Millions March, where they basically went on the march in New York against police brutality against African American men. So that was Vice Media. It's very handheld. It's very, like, you go right up to people and they're yelling in your face. It's got quite a visceral kind of feel to it. The BBC have done a lot of different types of experiments, from everything from symphony orchestra kind of classical stuff to just short pieces out in rural English countryside. They just kind of slip theirs out there, release little things here and there that they're interested in. But in terms of us producing something, there's it's actually becoming really quite a lot easier quite quickly. So previously it used to just be you'd have to have 6 cameras, and GoPro cameras rigged together generally is the way that people have done these. The VRSC, they've custom made their own kind of equipment because they were very much the first to start doing that sort of thing. But yeah, you basically have 6 GoPros on a rig and recording equipment, and there's a lot of challenges in it. For instance, where does the director stand if you've got a full 360-degree capture of a scene? How do you set up shots? There's a lot of, traditionally been a lot of post-production, like you have to stitch together all the different, but that's changing because they're there's just new cameras coming out all the time which are 360-degree fully controlled. Yeah. So the company I mentioned before that we've been talking to, who are based out of Perth, they do a lot of aerial 360-degree video capture, and they've been doing it for 15 years. It's not a new thing for them. But in terms of producing stuff for the environments that are available now, like through the Oculus or the cardboard, you can buy a 360-degree camera, not a particularly fantastic one, for like a couple of $100 in the US, and you kind of put it on the table, capture the room, or and then all the post-production that used to be about stitching all the different video together is kind of erased because the lens is able to capture enough of field that you can create a compelling experience. But to go back to the immersive, it's called immersive journalism, was a term that was coined by a woman called Noni de la Peña, who she started doing a bunch of, I guess, 3D work around sort of, I guess, sites of action, so crime scenes or scenes where there'd been something major happen. She would recreate that in a 360 environment using 3D, and the idea was that it would give you a real sense of being there. Now, obviously, with video capture, it's even more profound. So,
yeah, I wonder what the privacy issues are. I mean, because you're not, when you're interviewing someone, that's one thing. It's a very limited window into the person's life, but here you are, really capturing a lot of information.
Yeah, you are behind you everywhere.
Yeah. So especially when it comes to political issues. It's going to be an interesting development.
I would definitely look up her work. She's written quite a lot about it. Yeah, it's not something that we've had to deal with yet because we haven't made anything. We're in the process of trying to get started in the area. So as more and more headsets get released, and it's going to be next year by the sounds of it, like all the big kind of Sony's apparently got an announcement coming up, and the Oculus is out, and Facebook have just put out their new cardboard, and Google got cardboard. The race is on. So as more and more people have these headsets, we'll start seeing more and more content get produced, and then all these issues are going to be worked out on the fly. But no one's ever asked me that before, and I'm quite interested to know the answer because I don't really know. So.
Well, I was just thinking because Google Glass in Europe has had a really bad rap, so to speak, because people were so worried about their privacy.
Yep.
And if you go into a store or a museum, and where does it end in terms of where does the data go? And that was one of the major, I would say, in Europe, it was one of the major issues why Google Glass never really took off or was supported by, say, the commercial side versus the private sector, the private side. So I'm just wondering if that would not run into a similar issue, the social acceptance.
I can imagine it will, but at the moment there's not enough that's being produced. But I don't know if you guys know about the Jump, the Google Jump.
Yeah.
So it's basically a rig for GoPro that Google have collaborated. When you start seeing lots of people out there with cameras recording everything, which and maybe we're getting to the point where these things are becoming less questioned almost. People are just expecting to see themselves on the back of a piece of footage. You're like, oh, there I am. It'll be quite interesting. interesting. I think these issues will definitely emerge through doing that. So there's a YouTube 360 channel now, and you can basically go on there and look at all the stuff that people are putting out, which is mainly stuff like base jumping and, you know, like action.
So that is the interesting thing, I think, about all of this stuff. So like next year is really going to be the watershed, because as you say, there's all these things going to be released. But I wonder if it'll be like 3D television, that everyone will buy it, and those kinds of things, like, you know, jumping, like bungee jumping off something. It's great for the first few times you do it, but you tire of that very quickly. The novelty wears off very quickly. So I wonder if in 5 years' time, people are going to look back and say, remember that virtual reality headset craze, 2016, wasn't that a laugh? Now nobody's wanting to use them for anything.
It's already happened.
It's already happened.
I mean,
well, in the 90s, everyone was like,
I remember VR in the 90s,
But maybe that was because technically it wasn't there.
Because it was block figures doing nothing.
And there was latency issues, and it was cumbersome and expensive. And even if it's cheap and ubiquitous, it really has to be about, does it offer anything in content terms that you don't really get from traditional
media? And I would say, in terms of something like Sidra, yes, it absolutely does. There's nothing like it. But how much empathy do we want too? That's the other question that's going to arise. Do we want to be put into war zones? Like there's VR out there, a company called, I forgot what it is, it begins with R, but they sent a VR camera into Syria, into Aleppo, and basically, you know, a bomb goes off behind. Like, do we want to be in those environments as well, in that fully immersed way? At the moment, we're like, wow, that's amazing. What will that do over time? Will it be too confronting, you know? And
or will you be desensitized to it?
I was just going to say, we watch films that are extremely violent today. I mean, 10 years ago, some of the violence we see today would have been unimaginable. So there is a level of desensitization, and we also have graphic videos of beheadings on. I mean, you know, it's all out there. So, I mean, one of the things I could see that if it was to take off, for example, that really it becomes a new art form, or a new way of communicating that we can't conceive right now.
I mean, there are a lot of artists who've been using this technology for many years. So there's a guy called Luc Cochane who invented his own 360 immersive video system and shot a whole lot of really beautiful films that were all shot in 360, and they were about lives of families and things. And they were, but I think the issue why they never caught on was just the delivery mechanisms. And that's not the problem anymore, right? Because you've got like the YouTube 360 channel. And
the other thing is gaming will have an impact, you know, and you know, gamers are really excited about VR. Zero latency's obviously just opened up in Melbourne, and people are interested in, you know, sort of what the next steps are. I don't know if you guys have seen a thing called The Void. It's like it's a VR theme park. But it's got actual, you know, like, so for instance, you can pick things up and they feel like you pick up a block and it feels like a lamp, or you know, you touch something and it you know, it gives way, but it feels as though there's like you're going inside a dragon. Or so it's got these quite, you know, the ability to fool your mind is quite like, even watching very sort of what I would describe as really cheesy horror movies on the Samsung Gear, which is in the Samsung menu. I don't know if anyone's looked at any of those, but I watched one which is like, you go down, you're strapped into a wheelchair and you're in an insane asylum, and you go down, you know, stairs, and there's a guy behind you, and then there's creepy people, and it's the worst kind of base level of horror. It's really cheesy and it's really scary. Like, you're just like, what?
I guess we'll see with Sony. I mean, it was overnight Sony renamed Morpheus to PlayStation VR.
Great job marketing.
They use VR quite a lot for therapy, so exposure therapy. I asked a guy based here in Melbourne who's been doing it for several years at a VR meetup recently, you know, does it wear off? Because that's exactly the question that I have too. Will it wear off? I'm still excited by it, but I haven't been doing it for very long. And he's like, not in his experience, you know, people still think the spider's there and they're still really scared, or they still can't get people to step off the the plank, even though they know that it's just the ground, you know, and that
Yeah.
the illusion is quite profound. So
Yeah, there's an entire research program based on that called Presence.
yeah,
And
okay.
yeah, you can still do that. And there's, in terms of therapy, it's lasting. Apparently, it is really, there's been studies on public speaking, anxiety, and exposure therapy. And it's definitely, people have freed themselves to some large extent from anxiety.
But the reverse is probably true as well. Like I've got a colleague at work, I showed her that horror film, she still thinks she gets PTSD flashbacks. She's just like, I can't think about it, I still get them. So, you know, I mean, I can imagine it's something like a Void theme park where you've got a dragon jumping out at you, people are going to have heart attacks, you know.
Which can also happen in the compassionate journalism.
Yeah, that's right too.
There's a great YouTube, well it's not great, it's quite horrifying, YouTube clip where it was one of the early Oculus things, they suspended someone, so it was a parachuting demo, and so they're suspended, so they've got this sensation that they're plummeting down. What's horrifying about it is the person in the video so what they're watching tries to pull the ripcord and the parachute doesn't open. And they hit the ground, and you see physically that their body just convulse when they think they're hitting the ground. And all the friends are standing around thinking it's hilarious, but it's going to go really bad at some point. Like it's really horrifying. But
Stefan Greuter, who's at RMIT Games Design, he was telling me that apparently it's a new thing. They're trying it out with roller coasters. So you're strapped into the roller coaster, but you put the headset on so that you have a different kind of environment. So you can be going through a Brazilian jungle or something on your roller coaster. So you're going over waterfalls, and that, you know, it's a way to give the kind of same tired old experience like a new life almost based on the mind. But yeah, it will be very interesting to see how all this stuff kind of pans out. But I mean, that's kind of the thing for us, you know, we don't know. Obviously, no one knows what's going to, all you can do is go, well, the amount of money that's being invested in something like VR at the moment gives us a pretty good idea that it's worth planning for, just in case it does take off, and that with a small amount of investment we can get ready so that we're not, you know, completely caught short if it did happen to be, you know, that was a big thing. That's the next way that we consume content. So, yeah.
All right, and I'm afraid we've run out of time, but please join me in thanking Astrid for coming out and giving us a great talk. And I guess you've been around for a few minutes if anyone wants to talk to you or anything, or has any further questions, but thank you again. And our next speaker in 2 weeks' time, I'm not sure who it is, but...
off the top of my head, I don't remember.
Yeah, it's because Tom's not here either.
Yeah, that's Tom.
But I'm sure it'll be someone.